A great panel of experts, and I'm sure there will be plenty of points of discussion. So I don't want to waste any more time. The agenda is as follows. Each panelist will give a quick 12-minute individual reflection of the topic at hand. After this, we will start a panel discussion with some of the questions that we've prepared for the panelists. And then finally, we will open the floor to questions from the audience itself. So without further ado, I want to give the floor to Dr. Mitchell. Um, you may please begin and share your slides.
Hi there, everyone. So I have decided to focus on the areas that I work in and on space science and its impact as opposed to the space industry, as we have more accomplished panelists than me to talk about that. So just for those who are not in space, we ask why space, and so we have the space sciences, which are essentially telescopes either on Earth or in space, mostly on Earth, looking up at space trying to solve the burning questions of our time about the universe. And then, of course, we have the space industry. So this is satellites in space transmitting data back to Earth. And I've got an example there after a cyclone in Mozambique. You can see the difference between being on the ground and having satellite data to assist. And this, of course, is satellite TV, news, GPS. All the things we use in our everyday lives are provided by the space industry. So I'll be talking about space sciences, but it's important to note that all aspects of the space industry as a whole contribute in one way or another to the solutions of all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So space is certainly not something that we can ignore in Africa, and we should embrace and grow. So I work for the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, and we built the Meerkat telescope in the Northern Cape. The Meerkat is the best telescope of its kind, and it is doing groundbreaking science. This telescope will ultimately be integrated into the Square Kilometre Array telescope, which aims to be the largest radio telescope in the world. The mid-frequency portion is being built in South Africa, and the low-frequency portion is actually being built in Australia. So I always like to show this image. This was the first image produced by the team from the Meerkat telescope. And this is of the center of our Milky Way galaxy. If you look at the very bright area in the center, that is the black hole at the center of our galaxy. And the very bright section just to the left of that is a star nursery where stars are being formed. And then the weird bubbles to the left of that are supernova remnants. So essentially, star graveyard. So these stars are being constantly formed, growing, and dying essentially in the center of our galaxy. So I wanted to touch on the benefits. So the Meerkat telescope, we had an independent review done from 2011 to 22 through the project. And this included 8 billion rands of investment, which produced 19 billion in production for the country, an 8.8 billion increase in GDP, many, many jobs, general increase in household income, and 90,000 people were directly benefited. And it's been very important for partnerships. You know, on the right-hand side there, you can see all the countries and all the hours and calls they've made to use the Meerkat telescope. It's very much an international project and being used all around the world. So I just included this slide to show that even though space science can seem separated from the average person and everyday life, it really does generate a lot of business benefits, sorry. And another thing is radio astronomy is essentially a data science. We receive data from the dishes, and we have to do a lot of data correlation and analysis. Even storage is a challenge for all this data. Meerkat produces the equivalent of 5,500 digital TV channels at any point in time. So through this project, a lot of innovation has happened in data analytics, data storage, machine learning, etc. So it has a very real impact in sectors outside of just the space science. So in my job, I run the Africa Radio Astronomy Program, or ARAP. This was originally known as the African VLBI Network, or AVN. The idea was to put large dishes in all of the partner countries in Africa, but we realized that this was not only much more costly and time consuming than we expected, but it wasn't necessarily addressing all of the specific challenges in each of our partner countries. So together with our partner countries, we developed a new strategy, and this strategy addresses a number of interventions, as you can see listed here, from bursary programs to high performance compute training, an e-learning platform, and then, of course, rolling out actual infrastructure and instruments for training and for doing science. We do this in partnership with a number of programs from overseas and local to South Africa. So I did my PhD after a decade. I finally finished as an old woman, but I looked at Meerkat as a case study and tried to derive an economic model that countries can use to invest into space science and technology in a sustainable way that really drives benefit. And so I've just got a brief outline here. And from my research, ideally, these programs have to start right at the beginning, grassroots outreach and awareness, which develops into education and human capital development. At Soreo, we had a human capital development pipeline that not only addresses university degrees, but also artisan training and even schools programs. And that moved into the next phase where we did facilitated development. We helped companies to innovate and grow. And eventually, some products that we had to import, we now manufacture here and are able to export. And this leads to more innovation and commercialization and becomes a self-growing cycle. So I thought it was worth just pointing that out. And then, of course, we come to Africa to Moon. This is my passion project. I've been working on this since 2013. So Africa to Moon has the dream of putting 55 instruments onto the far side of the moon, one to represent every nation in Africa. We were lucky to be selected by the Chang'e 8 mission flying to the moon in 2029. They've accepted a technology demonstrator payload. So we will be sending 3 of our balls or bounced African low lunar spheres. These 3 spheres will be placed on the moon surface on the near side as a demonstrator, and the 3 balls work together as a telescope array, like the dishes for Meerkat, except they're detecting very low frequencies. So we currently are producing the engineering models, which have to go to China in April. This is our first major milestone. These will be attached to the lander in China and go through rigorous testing. We then have a qualification phase, and next year we'll be building the final flight models, which will go to China and wait for launch in 2029. This is Africa's first space exploration mission. It is completely designed and built by Africans, and this mission may well be the first radio telescope array on the lunar surface. That's a global first. It may do first-time science, which will be a global first, and it may well be the first radio astronomy instrument to send back data from the lunar surface. So we're proud on behalf of Africa, and we hope this project will inspire young people to chase their dreams. We have achieved this project purely on volunteers and collaborators. No money has been spent on this project, and we want to show that in Africa, if we collaborate, we can literally reach the moon. So here's hoping, hold thumbs for our success as we move through these phases. And then just to say, I established the Foundation for Space Development in 2009, and this foundation houses the Africa to Moon project, and we partner with Soreo, with the South African National Space Agency, with industry participants, University of Stellenbosch, University of KwaZulu-Natal. So we have a lot of supporters, and we are very grateful to them for reaching these milestones. And the foundation has future programs that we're working on developing that we hope ultimately will benefit lives in Africa from space. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. That was a truly insightful. It's really exciting to see what amazing things you guys are doing over there, and it's absolutely amazing. That was purely on a volunteers basis. I think hopefully you not set a precedent, but you really show the nation and the rest of Africa how we can sustainably do amazing things without having the massive budgets of other countries. Now, next on the list is Miss Tongwane. She just sent me a message stating that she might have some problems. So until she is ready to speak again, I think we can skip her for now, and move on to Miss Alana, um, if that is fine with everyone.
Fine with me, if everyone's happy.
Cool. Alana, you have the floor.
Thanks, Dirk. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here this afternoon. Um, I'm in a little bit of a transition at the moment. So I spent the last almost 4 years at Innovate UK Business Connect, which is a UK innovation arm of their government agency where we foster innovation and, co-development of new products and services with different countries. I'm no longer there. I've just left a month ago, but still very much active in the space industry in South Africa. So I'm from South Africa. I'm not a Brit. Some people might think I am. I'm not. I'm from South Africa and proudly South African. So I'm going to have a little bit of a different lens. I'm going to take you through, I guess, the journey of the experience of international development with South Africa. So, South Africa has this really rich heritage and history in the space industry from pre-apartheid days. It obviously took a knock when, funds were reprioritized for, equality and equal creation of opportunity for the country. But the last 10 years, there's really been a push to get South Africa back on track because we are still Africa leading and in a lot of ways, particularly in the private sector, as you will hear, world leading still. So I think most of you will know of the Africa Earth Observation Challenge. So back in the day in 2016, I was one of the first team members to build that when it was an initiative from SANSA, the space agency, where they came to us and said, hey, we have all this data from these satellites that we're collecting, and we actually, there's so much that can be done with it. How do we work with companies that know what to do with it? So that's how that challenge was born. And I think most on the call will now know that it's now an Africa-wide challenge. I think there's over 60 partners, and the European Space Agency is now on board. So over time, the South African ecosystem has gone from, being a little bit, I'm going to say dormant because there's been quite a lot of things coming out, but there wasn't a lot of development happening. And over the last 10 years, that's really changed. So we had those really great university programs, the Sunsat, where all the big guys are currently spun out of. And now we're in that phase where new ones are potentially coming in. So in 2023, we started having discussions with the space industry in South Africa and said, particularly the private sector. And we sat them down at a dinner table, all 13 companies at the time, and asked them, what will actually help you guys in the context? And to be honest, the private sector in South Africa, as you will hear, is phenomenal. They're doing amazingly well, world leading, own 80% of the world's camera market currently. I think that's correct. You guys may stand corrected. But essentially, the problem came in is in governance and in laws to enable these businesses to continue to grow. So we then hosted a tour. We took 3 from each country, from South Africa, Kenya, and Rwanda, through to the UK, and we basically took them on a tour of how the UK runs. So the UK, just to give context, is a really, really robust, mature system. And they have an ecosystem that works together. So government supports private sector supports government. There's a lot of world-leading policies that are being built around sustainability and enabling the growth of their sector. So we took these guys through, and we had a long week of seeing everything from launch capabilities to satellite creation to, how do you create your governing policies to how do you enable ecosystem development? And Space Hubs Africa, as an example, is a key component of what makes the UK ecosystem so strong, because they have these hubs and they share knowledge and, hey guys, we're doing this. Instead of building your own facilities, come and use ours, as an example. That tour was pivotal because it showed the camaraderie between not only South Africa, but the different African countries. And it also showed the UK that you're not the best at everything. So there were a few things where South Africa's capabilities and in other countries as well, there's actually things that are world leading there, and there can be knowledge exchanged on either side. So what was born was something called the UK Africa Space Technology for Sustainability Innovation Network. It's a very long name, but essentially it brought together people from different countries who are interested in knowing what space technology can do. And as Dr. Sharp mentioned, there's so many applications of space that's really good for your economy. It's really good for, society in terms of climate change, in terms of disaster management, insurance, you name it. There's things, food security. So there's definitely a lot of applications that can be used. And what we started doing is we had a board created across these 4 countries where we came together and said, okay, where can space technology move the needle in Africa? So not only South Africa, but Africa as well. And Earth observation, the management of that data coming down from satellites, and entrepreneurship development were the main things that every country said, hey, this is what we need to focus on. So we embarked on a mission and we enabled investment into different startups and companies that were kind of tackling these issues. So just to give an example, we ran one grant. So it was 180,000 pounds total. I'm not sure how much it is in rands now. It's not that much. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny amount for a space company. And we funded 2 projects, and one was a South African company as well. And within 6 months after that, they had unlocked 1.5 million pounds in follow-on funding, which is 32 million rand. So that's within a year how much was actually created. So we realized that South Africa's ecosystem is so strong that it doesn't need a lot of, you need a lot of money to do the facilities, but you don't need that much because you have the capabilities and you have SANSA and government agencies and DSTI who are really pushing on building the right structures in place to help the private sector grow, which is different from what we've experienced for the last 20 years because, priorities had shifted. So South Africa is an amazing example of a mix of heritage and a mix of drive to kind of take things forward, which is really what we saw the value of what was coming out of that. So from that grant that we delivered, we also got in the creation of 3 new technologies as well within a year-end market, which was fantastic. So the value of this is really, and I think the message of this is creating an open dialogue, not only locally, but internationally as well. So we were talking about the echo chamber of the space industry. So how do we stop preaching to the choir? We have people in the room who understand the space sector, we understand the value, but how do we get other guys in the room to really show them this is the power of space technology and what it can do for you? So we need to open that dialogue and create visibility of South Africa's capabilities. We have an amazing private sector. SANSA is world leading in a lot of things. So, a lot of international launches, SANSA is involved in all over the world. Geographically, we're super well positioned. So is Kenya as well. And it's really about showing what the value is we can bring to the global space sector, which is really important. So that's where we are. I would say South Africa is a very interesting country to collaborate with. Because there's lots of different barriers and it's a very different, different context to most other countries as well. But I'd say the appetite is shifting, and particularly Africa to Africa. So I think there's only been one sale to date from South Africa's world-leading capabilities. There's only been one African customer ever. So how do we change that? How do we start getting other African countries buying from South Africa? And how do we enable that intercontinental growth is really my question going forward. That's me. Thanks, Dirk.
Cool. Thank you, Ilana. Thank you for those insights. And honestly, a world that most of us, Daniel was talking about how a lot of researchers aren't necessarily financially literate. I think the same goes to most of us, the typical engineers and the space industry experts who focus on our problems, but we don't actually ever see the financial aspects of the industry and how it all works together to actually create the amazing environment that we're in. I would like to now continue. Tongwane, are you now ready to present?
We may continue, Dirk. I'll be ready in the next one. Thank you.
Next one. Okay, no problem. Then I would like to give the floor to Leandi Kiani. Leandi, please go ahead.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Dirk. I'm going to quickly just share my screen and just hopefully this works really easily. Just give me a quick second, but maybe just not to waste anyone's time. So just a quick intro about me. As Dirk mentioned, I'm very much from the commercial sector. So my background is 12 years working very much in the commercial space sector, working with several notable African entities who are basically, unfortunately, my system is denying me, so I'm just going to not even worry about sharing. We can always maybe share it after the fact, but working with notable African space companies who have gone on to be internationally successful. And I think why that's important is just to kind of give preface to my backstory, which is really I've seen a lot of what's worked and what hasn't worked over the years. And so my next slide was really just saying space is export or die. And I think the crux behind that and what I've just seen time and again from a commercial perspective is that there are very few countries in the world, and it's really the US, China, India, who can afford to be completely dependent on national government programs or just the national things happening to really sustain the ecosystem. South Africa and Africa is definitely not in that perspective where we can rely on commercial or at least national programs to sustain commercial business. So I think that from what we've just seen time and again, and I'll get to my triple helix now, but it's that if you don't basically have enough going on in terms of that program, then your industry just cannot survive. So what I always like to tell people is if you don't focus on exporting hardware or products, you're going to be ultimately exporting people. And so when I've ever spoken about, not just South Africa, but what's needed to create a sustainable satellite industry, then the thing I like to think about is, as I mentioned, it's the triple helix model. And basically, it's a very simple diagram, but it's got government, academia, and industry. And when you think about the space industry, oftentimes, and if you think in the African context, and if you think about South Africa as a lessons learned, obviously government, we understand it's critical for space. There's a high barrier of entry. Most startups don't initially have access to the very expensive equipment, clean rooms, labs, etc. So where government really is critical is one, yes, a national space program is great because that does give new entrance opportunities for technology demonstration and access. But more than that, it's access to infrastructure, it's funding programs. All of these sorts of things are incredibly useful, and that's sort of the environment that government provides, policy as well, to have a conducive policy environment. Academia as well, again, it's kind of obvious that you need a strong R&D, you need the talent, so you need a talent pipeline. But I think the crux where a lot of African countries struggle and where South Africa initially struggled. So this to me is kind of the crux, is the industry part of the three pillars. And what we saw in the South African context was that we had basically in the early years of the 1990s, as Ilana already mentioned previously, you know, there was this whole space program. There was a lot of focus on it. We had a lot of talent and capacity build up over that time. And we then ultimately had Sunsat that was launched in the 1990s through Stellenbosch University. So again, not built by industry players, but built by academia. And then we had this very interesting thing happen. We had Sunspace spin out, and it was going to be this industry partner to build spacecraft. What ended up happening was, you know, there were a lot of other factors, so I don't want to whittle it all down to this one factor, but ultimately a critical thing that went wrong was an over-reliance on government as an anchor tenant. And I think it's something we see time and again, even just in my own commercial experience in South Africa. I've seen many companies die as a result of this, is because there is an over-reliance on a single government customer or one or two government customers. And inherently, government cannot be your anchor tenant. They can't, I mean, they can be one of. And so from a CubeSpace perspective, we have more than 290 customers across 30 countries, because the reality is space is fickle. Policies change, governments' prerogatives change. And so to be fully reliant on one customer is inherently very risky, but more than that, to be reliant on government customers is never a good position to work from. So really the crux to having a successful space business is ensuring that you have sufficient customers to fill the gap. Because the other thing I just want to mention is satellite programs are cyclical. There are times when it's quiet, and because everyone sort of goes through the design, build, launch phase, operate for a while, and then some time passes, and only at that point again do they start building replenishment satellites or satellites for other customers. So I think it's really critical to understand that to have a successful and sustainable industry, that it needs to really be a focus from the start to understand, you know, how to make it internationally and export friendly. So the thing for me, and the change, what differentiates South Africa today and how we are a leader in Africa in this sector, is not because of the government or academia aspects. I think, of course, we have a very strong government baseline. There is a lot of infrastructure. There is a focus in funding and policy initiatives. And of course, we are lucky that we have strong academic programs as well with great talent. But the thing that really differentiates us, and I think the reason why other African countries look to South Africa, is really to understand how we were able to get to this industry that seems to be just thriving. And I think the thing I want to make very clear there is that, you know, South African companies today, we're not building for South Africa, we're building for the world. There's really an export mindset, which has developed after the Sunspace lessons, so to speak. So there was then, after that, a lot of companies that sort of splintered out from that. And there was really a strong commercial focus on how to have minimal viable product. Let's get to market and let's just be as agile and kind of lean as possible. So I feel like that's really a differentiator for South African and African countries and companies who have been successful, is just the ability to leapfrog and be very good at understanding what is the minimal product required just to get into a market and to be able to sort of dominate. So I do want to contradict Ilana a little bit, just to say that there is hope, because we are doing work in Africa, not a significant amount because there are limited programs on the continent, but we are working with 5 different African countries on various programs. So it's not to say that the African supply chain and ecosystem doesn't exist, but at the moment it is quite underdeveloped. And I think there is still a belief within Africa that you need to look towards Europe or other partners as for that knowledge transfer and capacity building. And so what I just wanted to have as sort of concluding thoughts to this was that yes, government programs, super crucial, obviously, for all the reasons already mentioned, access to infrastructure, focus from a national perspective on space, funding opportunities, the policy, etc. And of course, academia, no-brainer, we need R&D and we need the talent. But I would say that what's really needed and what I think the clincher is that there needs to be focus on market access. So who are those global customers and building out that customer base from day one with an export mindset that needs to be the outset. So who are my customers and, how am I going to get my product to them? And again, where there is government programs, because again, I think there are great initiatives across Africa, is understanding how they can get that industry involvement from day one. And I think that, Alana mentioned it, and I think Africa, Carla's program, which shows there's already these very well-developed programs within the African context of collaboration. But I think a focus on regional partnerships to drive local industry development is really something that we're underutilizing. So again, that focus on, a regional supply chain with coordinated procurement, we can share infrastructure. Again, South Africa and Egypt and a lot of other Nigeria, there is some really good local African infrastructure instead of trying to think you have to redesign the wheel each time. And then again, joint satellite programs. So I know that there is already one, the ARMS constellation, but to have more of these programs where we can jointly work together to have regional satellite programs, which just gives new entrants, suppliers, technology, that first flight opportunities. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done, but I think the industry part, which is often I feel like the part that's least thought about in this discussion, is actually the clincher here and needs the focus. So my concluding thought here was sometimes, especially from a national perspective, there's often this focus on, from a national perspective, how many satellites do we have? It's more like a resource thing. How many satellites are we operating? What are the benefits of that? But I would like to challenge that mindset and say, instead of measuring success by how many satellites we launch, because again, in the South African perspective, we've launched several, but it's very few, and it's been a couple of years in between. We should rather measure success by how many companies survive. And so that's my story.
Thank you, Lee. It should be interesting to see how these business perspectives also translate to other hardware, how should I say, businesses that do not focus exclusively on the CubeSat market, but in the space sector in general. I'm sure many of the lessons translate well. However, I'm not sure. Not completely sure. Thank you very much for.
Yeah, Dirk, maybe just as a rebuttal to that, I think that I think the reality is to any satellite business, whether it's hardware or even on the downstream, I think the reality is there's not enough of a consumer base across the board to think that an African farmer necessarily has the capital to pay for satellite imagery or to feel like, so I think across the board, your consumer necessarily is not going to be the local audience. So that's just my quick rebuttal.
It's a good rebuttal, and one that's often discussed with the Earth observation advocates. Anyway, thank you very much for your slides. I think we can finally give Fungwani a chance. I see she's already ready to go. So over to you, Fungwani.
Meetings, Dirk. Thank you so much. Well, after the wonderful speakers we've had now, it's quite a tough act to follow, but thank you so much. From the SCS Aerospace Group, with the subsidiary SCS Space, which focuses particularly on whose core business is, well, it's engineering. Core business is satellite engineering, though, particularly around systems engineering, being a missions partner, and consulting engineering. I do wear several hats just in terms of my role in the whole entire space ecosystem. So I think those are important to mention, particularly in the South African environment, within Southern African development community around continental Africa, as well as globally. So, my perspectives do come with more, local and practical kind of sense, but also some type of a global flavor. We're involved in space resources from, a technical perspective, as well as sitting on the International Aeronautical Federation board committees, particularly for space societies, and now moving to space finance. So my primary role is in commercial finance, or as I'd like to say, I think this title sounds pretty cool, which is commercial finance for outer space activities. And I get asked, commercial space, you mean in terms of real estate? And I say, no, commercial space in terms of literally outer space. So the fact that we have this, in the country, the fact that we have such a long history, particularly in the space industry, coming firstly out of the governmental type of area and focus with defense, with us having a space program since 1958, and being the third country to sign on the Outer Space Treaty of the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and then developing more into a commercial arena where we are participating, both from a governmental perspective. I'm really excited to see that we have our space agency here, but we're also making strides in terms of the commercial industry. I mean, one key point that I'd really like to note from an overall industry perspective is that of the last SpaceX rideshare mission, around 20% of the payloads were actually provided, the components were provided by the South African space industry. And I think that is absolutely extraordinary. It is something that we can really, give ourselves a celebratory clap for. 116 of those components, and it really is a testament to how far the South African space industry has come, and I think even more importantly, how well respected the South African space industry is. I will share just a little bit more about SCS Space. I hope that you've given me permissions to share there, Dirk.
I think you should be able to share. I think, yeah. Just try sharing. Let me see. Just try sharing.
Okay, that's fine. Let us see if we can do this.
Great.
All right. So this should enable me though to go through to a file. And Derek, this is why we needed to do the run through, right? But that's fine. Just give me a moment, please. All right. No, it's actually telling me that it wants a PDF, but that is fine. Just as Leanne had said, we can probably send that information through when it's required. So I wanted to share particularly the largely ambitious development that SCS, the aerospace group, as well as SCS Space is currently involved in. We're currently developing 2 satellite constellations, the first one being one based on synthetic aperture radar, particularly in the small satellite class, which is just between 350 and 650 kilograms. This will be a 12 satellite constellations that plays 3 key roles. The firstly is maritime domain awareness in terms of monitoring oceans. What's a key factor is that we're looking at quite a wide swath, 750 kilometers at a go, with a capacity to have a revisit rate of around somewhere between a day and 8 hours. and also critical infrastructure monitoring, and lastly, agricultural applications in terms of satellite imagery data, as well as downstream applications. I heard there was a bit of a discussions about the capacity of either commercial farmers or smallholder farmers to actually have a market for satellite imagery, and we are of the opinion that that market certainly exists. Although there is an issue largely with industrialization around the whole African continent, particularly within the space sector, well, our viewpoint is that we have the capability, we have the skills and expertise, we also have the infrastructure, as well as the human capacity development that we're currently putting in place to be able to have the ambitions to build, satellite constellations that will compete with some of the best in the world. So in terms of our competitor analysis right now, the FleetStar satellite constellation would be sitting at around number 4. It is built particularly for the continent of Africa and to be used locally in South Africa as well as continentally. That is our main government, as well as institutional type of clients that we're looking for, although it has global capability. And what we're trying to say with this is that building our own satellite infrastructure or just space infrastructure is absolutely critical if we want to move industrialization on the continent of Africa, as well as South Africa leading the charge with that. But in particular, when we talk about the business of space. In some markets, you could think around market saturation, and that market saturation happens when you're looking at the same type of data and you're chasing the same type of clients. But when we start looking at the expansion capabilities of satellites data, as well as space technology as a whole, this is where there is this really exciting opening up of commercial applications, which sometimes haven't really been considered before. So, for example, talking about critical infrastructure monitoring, that could be from governmental perspectives with large-scale infrastructure developments, or it could actually even be from commercial companies that are building large-scale infrastructure developments for commercial purposes. And what we basically sell, in terms of the use case is that instead of sending out field architects and field surveyors, as well as drone imagery and cars and all of the associated costs that come with that, you're actually able to do substantial monitoring of the development of your construction from space. And sometimes we walk into these industries, we walk into these companies. The telecom sector is another one in terms of monitoring of cell tower health. And we start talking about the capabilities around space. The world is moving more towards breaking down the psychological barriers of understanding, where space is actually fully integrated into our daily lives. When we're going to speak about global positioning systems, providing location-based services, sometimes the market development that needs to be done is for somebody to understand that you have GPS on your phone because there is a global network satellite system that works on location-based services. And how do we start taking that further? So while some other industries are looking at moving completely off planet, so of course we have low Earth orbit, which has large satellite constellations, particularly in telecoms that are being developed. We're looking at building satellite constellations, particularly for Earth observation. But this also now extends to a global space economy that is going beyond low Earth orbit, beyond geostationary orbit, both into cislunar space, the lunar economy, which is a very real potential, commercial revenue generator at the moment, and then the moon itself being some kind of gateway, firstly for scientific research, but also as a commercial aspect with resources to the next leaps that we start taking into the rest of the universe. So that is into Mars, that is moving out of our solar system, and that is moving completely interplanetary, into other into other systems. And this is where space resources come in. So what I find generally exciting, I recently come back from the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space Subcommittee on Science and Technical Matters that was held in Vienna in Austria, now from the 3rd of February until the 13th, was that there are such advanced discussions that are being had. And these advanced discussions move way beyond what we would traditionally look at challenges of the African environment, talking about obviously the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the factors around sustainability, and the factors around development. I think I absolutely nerded out on this, ladies and gentlemen, was the workshop that I attended on lunar navigation, positioning, and timing, talking about that the systems that we're developing are actually going to require to have their own lunar time that needs to be developed independent of UTC, simply because of the moon having its own orbit and how those systems need to be timed. So those levels of advanced conversations just really gather a sense of excitement about where we're going as the planet, where we're going as humanity, although with a very deeply entrenched understanding that we are still sitting with very deep development challenges in Africa. And when I talk about that, I really believe in there being two ways to go. It is either you're going to try and attempt to be followers. So we're going to look at the South African ecosystem and say, well, we need to be developing more satellites, or we need to be utilizing more satellite imagery in terms of downstream applications. Or we may look at technologies that can leapfrog some of our challenges, and leapfrog, sometimes we use this term quite interchangeably, is that will help us to accelerate dealing with some of the development challenges that we have. Market penetration in terms of broadband will lead to further market penetration in terms of Earth observation data, which will lead to enhanced policy making in terms of our own domestic policy, which relates to international as well as multilateral decision making from our government, which then affects our industry and the South African ecosystem. That also then leads to enhanced discussions with our scientists, with our engineers, with developing human capacity development within STEM, as well as within the industry as a whole. Would like to call space the gateway of the sciences because it is so large. So we're really excited at SCS Space about the types of ambitions that we have, being supported by the likes of the Industrial Development Corporation, being supported by the likes of our space agency, as well as our Department of Science and Innovation, and then also being supported by other jurisdictions or institutions in other jurisdictions that are saying, we're really proud that this is coming out of Africa. And particularly, we're really proud that we're South African, and we're saying, we're talking about space, we're talking about advanced tech, and we're really talking about taking something that is a key development area in our economy and being able to then develop that. So when it comes back to squaring the circle, in essence, in terms about the space economy in South Africa, I think we do have a lot of exciting things to look forward to in the commercial sector. I would say that moving from being purely exporters or having 90% of our product being exported to other jurisdictions, Middle East, East, as well at, Europe and North America, to developing the levels of market access that we're seeing opening up on the African continent. I'd say that from a governmental perspective, fully developing and now finally starting to find the funding to have large-scale developments around satellites, as well as space programs, which will be sustainable. We have a history of perhaps launching a satellite every 10 years. Now we're looking at sustainable space programs that will enable there to be long-term, projects that and large-scale projects that are being worked on. For example, as I said, like the Fleet Star constellation that is being developed. And then lastly, from a civilian perspective, where we're able to then channel this human capacity
Sorry,
development.
sorry, Thangoa. I would just ask that you start finishing up.
Right. This human capacity development aspect, of course, which is absolutely critical. So South Africa is poised and is still continuing to be a leader in the space economy on the African continent, particularly around industrialization, commercialization, and also our leadership in government. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much for that broad spanning input and your background knowledge is honestly an amazingly wide field of interesting topics that relate to the South African space economy. In particular, I would love to ask a question or two later about Fleet Star, I believe you called the constellation, but we'll hold that for the Q&A session. My final speaker that's been patiently waiting is Mr. Daniel Matsapola, and I'm very eager to letting him have the floor. Daniel, please.
Thank you very much, Dirk. I'm gonna share my slides. Hopefully you can see them, and I will start them in order from the beginning. Okay. Just firstly confirm if you can see them. I'm gonna hide my face. I've had to move around for better network. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So just a brief introduction. So I'm the space education manager at SANSA, and I earned myself a nice nickname there, which talks to capitalism, I guess. So to me, I don't know what we mean by private sector and public sector, because while I'm a government agency employee, I'm also an entrepreneur. So I'm both public and private. And I think that's what we need to start inculcating in the mindset of our young people. A bit about the space agency of Africa's most industrialized nation, organized around 4 programs. The largest satellite ground station in the Southern Hemisphere is in South Africa. That happens to also be home to the most diverse satellite ground station in terms of commercial frequency bands. It's in Hartbeespoort. That's Gauteng Province's West Rand. We are home to also Africa's only space weather forecasting center in Hermanus Overberg district of the Western Cape, home to the SANSA Science Center. So me dealing largely with space education, I'm going to focus my presentation largely on space education because, ladies and gentlemen, the space value chain starts and ends with human needs. Sometimes we forget and we think, well, it's about the toys, how sophisticated the toys we can put up in space are, how much they compare with other countries' toys. At the end of the day, and I like how Leandi said we shouldn't measure ourselves in terms of the number of satellites that we've launched, which is 13 at the moment, but how this technology translates into improved quality of life of ordinary South Africans, because that is the measure every government has. And we being a government agency, we can't move away from that. So inclusivity, I know that most of the panelists I'm with here will say Cape Town is home, Western Cape province. I started my career in the Western Cape. In fact, I used to earn more money from the Western Cape than anywhere else in terms of business. But yeah, I want to be as inclusive as possible. Our vision is clear: accelerating space innovation for the advancement of all South African citizens and enabling global impact. So we are advocating for space innovation accelerators, entrepreneurship, investing, financial literacy, and wealth creation for human capital development. From my own experience, when I was introduced in Stellenbosch University to satellite engineering, none of that featured. So I guess people didn't really understand where we are coming from, the rural areas of South Africa, and how we still just have our eyes open up when we see more students driving cars at Stellenbosch than lecturers. And it's a total different environment. So what we are trying to do is to balance this equation, and we want to stimulate a multidisciplinary thinking as the space education unit in SANSA. Through science and society engagement. There is an entire cabinet approved science engagement strategy. I hope you will each have a chance to look at. It's been with us for over 10 years now. Supporting STEM education, that's core business. Promoting the innovative use of space, science, and technology by the youth and society. And of course, career opportunities in space, science, and technology along the employee, business owner, self employed, and investor model. Those of you who've read Rich Dad Poor Dad book number 2, Cash Flow Quadrant, would know what that is about. Because in 2008, we published Careers in Space Science, profiling only employees. In 2014, another edition came out profiling only employees. So unconsciously, what we are doing is we are sending a message to the young people that employment is the only entry, out of academia into the world of work. And that is definitely not right. Hence, we see a lot of the unemployment rate going up. Look, we've drafted a SANSA Space Education Strategy 2025 to 2030 to align with the ramp-up phases vision. For future-proofing education, it's very difficult to sell education to young people, particularly STEM, in an era when unemployment is as high as it is. And they see that, no, you study this STEM, you get a degree, and you stay at home. So we are introducing disruptive elements that are disrupting the way STEM education is done. For example, we are introducing the maturity continuum. You see, it is not impossible. In fact, over 95% of STEM employees are perpetual dependents, climbing a corporate ladder they don't own, and unable to contribute meaningfully to creating jobs for our younger brothers and sisters behind. So we adopt a district development model, and this is the first year of the ramp-up phase under Ntate Humbulani Mudau. You know, one of the most exciting things is that a young boy from rural Venda can become the CEO of a space agency. A young girl from a township in Soweto can run a space company. I'm talking about Humbulani, I'm talking about JC, I'm talking about many others, and I'm hoping the women in space will provide those mentorships that we need, because for the next generation to look at opportunities like entrepreneurship, they need to be mentored. I had to be mentored myself to be the entrepreneur, investor, and wealth creator in the Western Cape and in Gauteng. So we need those mentorships. There they are, the satellites we've launched, 13 of them. Yeah, it used to be that every 10 years, but look at recently, it has shortened a little bit, And when we start doing what the SANSA strategy 2025 to 2030 advocates for, which is constellations, we certainly launched Africa's first constellation. And what I'm loving is that first it was the University of Stellenbosch. We've seen Cape Peninsula University of Technology come into the party, government with Sumbandila, private companies being spun off. Of course, the first one died. And we can all learn from lessons from the death of South Africa's first private company to suddenly university professors leaving comfort zone in university and starting companies and owning Africa's largest privately owned companies. Uh, I think Tongani, you shouldn't tell him I said that, just to keep things in balance. So South Africa celebrates 27 years as an African spacefaring nation. In fact, this week that ended yesterday was the focus week. And yes, you can see we are making the circle bigger. We are bringing in talent that is currently trapped under the rural cloud, because we know that Humbulani came out of the deep rural. We know that hidden under the rural cloud, there are talented young people who just need an opportunity, who are far away from the facilities that were largely developed during apartheid space program, away from prying eyes, and therefore not accessible to everybody. Inclusivity is the name of our game. So we took 23 people of various persuasions, space professionals, into various parts of South Africa, because also there is this culture that, owing to our past, many South Africans don't know South Africa, don't travel South Africa. They think Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg is South Africa. They happen to be three provinces that contribute double digit to South Africa. Look, you listen to President Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address. You've listened to Finance Minister laying out the budget. Our economy has not been growing. And it is because largely we are producing through our academic institutions, we are producing consumers rather than producers. High unemployment in society and over dependence on the government, where citizens make the government the economic parent of the citizen. Perpetual dependence, a script I was fed and I followed blindly. Go to school, graduate, look for job with benefits, stay loyal until retirement, rely on your pension until you die. An industrial age script that still keeps much of academia running the way that it is. But I can tell you we are facing serious challenges with the new technologies that are coming up, disruptive technologies. You can take a few weeks lessons and do far better than somebody who spent 19 years in academic institutions. And that is me, of course. I did that 19 consecutive years. Dependence is a problem. And like him or not, Donald Trump is disrupting the system. An African president whose country I won't mention asked, "Why are you crying when a man is taking the money that he was just giving and prioritizing on making his country great again?" He was voted by his citizens, so his duty lies with his citizens, and our president's duty lies with us. So instead of running to Davos to look for investors to come bring FDI here, I believe we need to deliver quality education, SDG number 4, to unearth talent out of South Africa and flip the script. Look at how many. We are the most unequal society in the world. Only 0.3% earning 1.5 million or more per year. Here are the accelerators that we are advocating for in the strategy. Wealth creation. It has been said all wealthy people are rich, but not all rich people are wealthy. Systems thinking. We want to bring that as we contribute to these three SDGs. Quality, SDG 4, SDG 8, SDG 9. And we are starting at primary school. With my generation back in the late 90s, early 2000s, they found us already with degrees. It was too late. We already programmed to look for jobs. So we used Gauteng and Stellenbosch universities training to look for jobs, only to find that jobs don't deliver economic freedom. Accelerator number 2, financial literacy. Gone are those days when we used to program children to look for jobs. Education that prepares us for jobs will take us out of poverty. That is correct. It is incomplete. It will take us out of poverty, but will never pass the middle class. We will be trapped in the middle class, climbing a ladder we don't own. We are advocating for flipping of the script and using mathematics to solve the proverbial X and making every day payday, leveraging this particular quality of planet Earth as it rotates around its axis, taking 24 hours to complete one. And while wrapping up, you've seen the corporate ladder. Many of our graduates are climbing a corporate ladder they don't own. In fact, there are not enough people in South Africa who are in the space business. People are pursuing space profession, and we are advocating for investing where we are minimizing the risk and maximizing the growth. And STEM entrepreneurship, investing, and wealth creation for a child who is born in South Africa with a 0% income tax bracket, a rare quality. All of us who are working start getting taxed at 18% progressively to 45%. In Nigeria, I think you cap it at 25%. Look, we need to really turn this Titanic away from the bigger iceberg that we can see emerging in the background. Space entrepreneurship, space and entrepreneurship is the answer. Vusitembe Kwayo says, why do people start businesses? 1, to live well. 2, to leave something for our children. 3, to sell it. And Mark Shuttleworth selling his business and paying the Russians to take him to the ISS as the first African in space was a classical example. My favorite by far is to change the world. Governments punish employees with taxes. So in every classroom we are in, targeting those 50,000 young people this financial year, we tell them not to become employees because government will punish you with taxes and disallowed deductions. The new Center for Economic Development, Research and Development with Innovations is the African household. Closing remarks. We are inculcating the entrepreneurial mindset in 13.5 million learners, taught by 460,000 educators, and we have partnerships with Principals Association. Limpopo chapter just invited us last week. SASTE, AMESA in 25,000 schools. We want to convert existing STEM graduates. So the 450,000 STEM entrepreneurs, investors, and wealth creators that we are aspiring to produce by 2030, they are not just the ones coming out of the school system, but they include professionals who are trapped climbing a ladder they don't own. And we want to make every day payday. I will stop there and will engage in the discussions. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Dirk, and facilitation.
Thank you, Dan. I would say, the first of all, the content was extremely interesting. But as a second point, I absolutely loved the way you spoke. I think you're a really good speaker, and I would strive to one day be able to convey passion as good as you, as well as you. I think this concludes the individual reflections of our panelists, and we can now start progressing to the question or the open discussion. I'm not sure if Nelly wants to add a few words of her own.
Thank you so much, Dick. I've really enjoyed all the conversations so far. Very interesting discussions. Nothing from my end. Just looking forward to the discussion session. Just quick reminder on our housekeeping rules. If you have any question, you could send the question on the chat, or you could just raise your hands, and then Dick would moderate. And Dick, I think you have some questions your end, so you probably want to start, and then we would have the questions from the audience. But if you have your questions, please just feel free to raise your hands or put it on the chat, and then we'll get to that. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Nelly. Now, the panelists will have to excuse me because they've pretty much answered some of the questions that we sent them before the panel began. So I had to go off the script as well a bit. So my first question is kind of directed at Alana mostly, but I would like inputs as well from Dan and Lee. And it begins with describe well. So you in your actual presentation, you describe South Africa's maturity as a space ecosystem, but especially like in broad terms. And what and then you spoke about your experience in Britain and seeing how their economy, their space economy, actually supports each other. And my question for you is, in a discussion with Dan and Lee, perhaps, which structures do you see is vital in promoting this unified and collaborative environment? And I want us to specifically also focus on, the entry stage for, a lot of students and, really early stage startups, which I think, you finish your degrees and almost suddenly you're in space and where you go. So yeah, over to you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Dirk. It's an awesome question. I think the main thing with, as we said, we know South Africa's ecosystem is quite mature, but I think the one thing that I've seen is missing is everybody is so good at what they do, they don't speak to each other. So as an example, like our job for the past 3 years in the network is just to bring people together. And we don't really run, I mean, I can't come and say because I'm not active in the space industry. I'm not a private sector player. I'm not a government person. I'm not making decisions on any policies. But when you put people in the room, so it was end of January, we had Neurospace in the room, we had DSTI, and we had Sansa. And it was so interesting because we'd never had, I mean, I don't know how often they congregate. By the feedback we got is that it hardly ever happens where you have all three in the room. And we had this with over various days. And I think that was super powerful because suddenly it's a 5 minute, like, hey guys, we're really struggling with this. And DSTI says, hey, we're actually working on that. Can you give your inputs and we can move forward? And just breaking down those communication barriers, I think, is the one way where, South Africa's, I mean, the private sector is very mature. I think that's just one way it will just accelerate way quicker. I'll pause there. Lee, do you want to take the entry question? Or do you want to comment on that first?
Sure. No, thanks, Alana, and thanks, Dirk, for that question. I think that I can give a real world example, which is that in CubeSpace's perspective, we were obviously sort of incubated within the university. And one of our first opportunities to really start sort of breaking into the international market was through the QB50 program. And that was really where we gained a lot of momentum and where we were able to get a lot of that initial flight heritage. So again, that was an example of an international program of which Stellenbosch University was one. And because of Prof. Steyn and all of his relationships, it put CubeSpace, not then yet CubeSpace, but just sort of this entity within the university in a very novel position to then be able to start supplying ADCS solutions to all of these different student programs. And I think that's just maybe in a very quick, I don't know how much time we have, I don't want to monopolize this, but just to say, I mean, that's a real world example. And from there, we then went on to gain a lot of traction, but that gave us that early heritage. That's oftentimes the hardest part for these startup companies.
Can I just respond to that? Yeah, I completely agree. So I think, it doesn't have to be one player, but like say academia, government, those programs that come in and sort of like de-risk the companies when they start, because for a startup to go and make a sale is hard. If you don't have that first sale yet, you haven't proven your technology. I mean, it works, but you haven't had it in markets. I think any sort of mechanism that enables that first step where you can go to your next customer and say, hey, this is what we've done, this is what we achieved, this is the impact. I think that's the one way, and I think those mechanisms are coming out slowly, but they need to be frequent, and they need to be consistent, and they need to be open to lots of things. So I know, I mean, we did this. We were like, we only want to focus on Earth observation, for example. So anyone who's doing another technology couldn't apply. So it needs to be available for, all the types of technologies that people are developing.
Yeah, I think I've also seen, on LinkedIn that there's the growth in this regard. Recently, I think the work that James Barrington Brown and his wife is doing with the Capes constellation here in the Western Cape again, we're going to see a bit more growth and a few more space companies spin out this side. Um, I do feel it's once again uh, uh, building on that problem that Daniel talked about with the centralized hubs being in the Western Cape and Gauteng. And but building on that, uh, uh, a question more directed to Daniel, and I don't know if he can actually or if he wants to talk about this, but I think a topic that we haven't mentioned in this entire discussion is the recent new developments that ASRI is doing with and the government's mentality with their sounding rockets and uh, uh, getting local launch vehicles ready. I would love if some of the panelists could voice their own opinions or their background knowledge or just expand on what they know about that program. And I think we can
Let me
start from
jump in.
Sansa's perspective.
Let me jump in. Quite often we don't acknowledge the long-term investment that the government has made. I mean, I stand here as testament to that. Celebrating 50, I was only 23 when I was brought to Stellenbosch to study. A certain professor at Stellenbosch said to me, it is easier to build a satellite than a space company. Now, what kills all companies? You talk about students exiting out of academia, and suddenly, boom, you faced with this prospect that you must start a company. I think that's a bad idea. I think that's a terrible idea. It's disrespecting entrepreneurship. This is somebody who has studied entrepreneurship for more than 5 years consecutively. You come out with your electrical engineering, software engineering, systems engineering, RF. I mean, and you think you're going to start a business. You've never taken a single lesson in entrepreneurship. It is disrespect. Yeah, for your profession, you spend 16, 18 years learning about it to even satisfy engineering council's registration requirements. And now there's this thing called entrepreneurship. Yeah, anybody can just jump in there. You're going to fail. The failure rate is very, very high, and it's largely driven by ignorance of people who say they are starting businesses, never taken a single lesson. What kills all business is risk. When they describe how Sunset died, I agree. It's risk, but it was ignorance as well. You can't put all your eggs in one basket and say, well, government will continue to order. What if they don't? Right? What we need is to develop a next generation of STEM entrepreneurs, whom in their education system we will have risk as one of the modules. They will understand what constitutes risk, inherent as well as other risks introduced by other elements. So, in a nutshell, we need to stop disrespecting entrepreneurship and think that any Tom, Dick, and Harry can just decide to start a business with this failure rate as high as it is. We need to get education, proper education. Entrepreneurship is a mindset first. It's a skill set, and it's rules. I see many people jumping in there who hoping for the best, and sometimes using government money in the process. I mean, come on. This is dangerous territory. So we need to, that's why we are advocating for SDG 4, quality education. The current academic system is incomplete, definitely, far from the mark. It produces people who will just seek jobs, and companies increasingly are saying, These people are not ready. In fact, I had a conversation with the space sector. They say, help us produce ready candidates to hit the ground running, understand our environment. And that is a good conversation. However, I go further than that as the space education manager. I say, well, these ready candidates, why don't you help them start their own companies as well? I'll leave it that. It's a discussion point.
Definitely. My immediate knee jerk with this though then is, do you think it's better to try and teach entrepreneurship in a classroom itself, or do you think, as Lana and Lee, I think also mentioned, it's better to, I almost want to say, try a shotgun approach where through incubators and mentorships and stuff, students have the capacity to just go at it, try and form a business, and through failure, possibly learn. Given, of course, constraints on how much risk is being managed. Carla, if you want to add something as well, please feel free. You don't have to, I think, raise your hand for the panel discussion.
Yeah, I mean, good points made by all. I think so. Again, the collaborative points. You get people trained in business and people trained in space. I'm an economist and I work with engineers and scientists, and we speak different languages. Our minds operate differently. And I think it's harder than you think to turn engineers and scientists into entrepreneurs. The trick is to pair them up appropriately. Let the business people do the business and let the scientists and engineers do their work, I think is probably the best route. The other thing is, I'm old now. I was also a young graduate who thought I knew everything and then spent 30 years failing and realized how little I knew. And you can't eliminate experience. And that comes, like you say, Dirk, with time and failure. I mean, it's taken us 13 years to get Africa to Moon where it is today. And I can tell you, if I was where I am now 10 years ago, the project would definitely fail. I have learned and grown so much over the last 10 years. And so that has to be taken into account. I think not just entrepreneur sort of driven programs where you're matching business people with scientists and engineers, but equally with mentors. Without the experience, I think that's why a lot of projects potentially fail and new businesses. So I think all the ideas are good, but they should be brought into a program where you're matching and putting people together and skills together that can work together with funding that can then move forward. I just wanted to make one other point, and that is I'm very much of the opinion that technology is a resource, and we tend to chase technology for the sake of technology. Look how many satellites, look, rockets, whatever it is. And we have to say, what challenge are we addressing? What problem are we solving? What market are we appealing to? And most of the successful space companies in South Africa have found their niche, their product, their supply, their area of expertise. And it doesn't help if we have 20 entrepreneurs starting satellite companies. Who they're going to sell satellites to, you know? And so I think also my advice would be as to entrepreneurs is look for that gap, you know, look for what you are contributing in terms of solving a gap or a solution. Because if we all start the same thing, none of us are gonna win. So thanks.
Thank you, Carla. Dan, I don't know if you want to make a
I
final
can
remark on this.
Yeah, let me jump in. Look, of course, the space value chain is what we are talking about, right? The upstream part of the space value chain is concentrated in the Western Cape. UKZN is giving us sovereign launch capability. And in this highly geopolitically charged environment, no South African in their right mind should be asking, why do we need our own rocket? Because they can switch you off. All right. So Entrepreneurship is a pathway out of dependence. I have highlighted in my slides that many of these professionals, if you look at the people attending the National Space Conference, very, very few people in that conference, less than 1% in my calculation, are in the space business. A lot of the people there, including myself, are pursuing a space career. They are employees drawing a salary. These are not entrepreneurs. These are job consumers. Now, what we need to do is get disturbed by this perpetual dependence, whether as individuals, as the sun spaces depending on government orders and dying when they don't come through, as countries depending on the global north that can switch you off at a Twitter notice, right? So what we need to do is destroy this perpetual dependency through quality education. I can tell you the kind of education we have at the moment is inadequate, not even close, because I'm a product of that education system. And with the pain of having to train yourself outside of it in a linear fashion. So you finish academia, then you have to find out that that was inadequate. Now you start taking lessons, paying through your teeth to get there. Why not hit two birds with one stone and bring I mean, when the president came in, he said, there was a headline, Ramaphosa wants entrepreneurship taught in schools. I celebrated. Of course, that's before the unions tackled him. And so there's always going to be this conflict. Generally, the majority of South Africans, we know where they are. They are not where these space ecosystems are flourishing. And so the majority of people in South Africa have no relationship with space. DSTV dishes are even in informal settlements, but that is a one-way thing. It is passive. You are not doing anything. So what we need to do is begin to have a conversation. How can we be inclusive? And of course, those of you in the Western Cape have had an advantage for years during apartheid. Yes, you had a first move advantage. That's why we celebrate the successes that are coming out of there. So, but there is an entire South African population that has no relationship historically with space. And we are going in through flagship programs like natural resource management to get the chief to, at the very least, not allocate land on wetland or long-term, flood plains, flood lines, because that is going to create a future problem when rainfalls come through flood. So space must be integrated into the fabric of South African livelihood, and only education. And as when you educate the child of a peasant to one day become the president of a country, that's what we are talking about.
So if I could just make a comment, Dan, I agree with you. Our education system as a whole needs vast improvement. And I agree that definitely at a government level, space technology needs to be integrated into decision making completely. But the value chain, I just wanted to add, I think it's time that we start thinking of Africa in terms of value chains. Our value chains don't need to be only Europe and the US. We have African value chains that we can, if we started talking, different countries have different sets of expertise, and we can start combining, developing value chains within Africa. It's not necessary for each of the 55 nations in Africa to have all of the skills and resources required to have a full space program, but we can offer each other. I mean, we have great software skills. For argument's sake, Nigeria has satellites. We can be doing the data reduction. They can be supplying the data. It's a silly example, but these value chains can be developed within and across Africa. And I think as soon as we start looking African, we'll see a much bigger market and many more opportunities.
Maybe, Dirk, if I can say one last thing just from the commercial perspective. So I obviously very much
Absolutely.
agree with Dan and what he's saying. I think the one thing just to maybe mention is that I think the constraint of space is that it's never going to be a high volume employer. And I think that's something that one needs to be realistic about. I think that if we look at South Africa and the Western Cape, where we have companies who are globally recognized, Keep Space being one of those, with 290 customers doing massive constellation work, extremely successful, but yet, we're a company of 80 people. And I can think of a lot of our neighbors who are doing similar volumes, and there may be 100 people, 150 people. So it's not the volumes of an automotive industry. Definitely space can be a really good employer, and the space industry, of course, brings a lot of other benefits, in terms of the technology and its application for Earth. And just, I mean, the actual sector itself is massive. So I'm not talking even about the downstream. What I'm just saying, though, just to push back slightly a little bit against Dan saying, we need to, like, the entrepreneurship and thinking we can have 100 space companies in South Africa. I'm just pushing back slightly to say, I think that, within the space sector, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think there's lots of funding. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for value creation and for people to really benefit from it. But I think just as an employer to people, and to make it viable, because let's be real, we're all people from the industry. The industry is hard. The space industry has a lot of barriers to entry. There's a lot of requirements in terms of infrastructure. It's not something that any person can just get into easily. So what I'm just saying is that I think definitely a focus on entrepreneurship is a good route, and more focus on education, and all of these things are really, really critical. But I think also just to be honest about what the space industry can be, and to think about how we can consolidate, and a little bit along the lines of what Carla was saying, but how can we work together? How can we piggyback and leapfrog on what each other is doing, and not feel like we necessarily have to reinvent the wheel or do everything ourselves? So I think that's just my comment.
Thank you, Lee. Carla, before you begin, I would like to ask if Fungwani doesn't have anything to add to this discussion. I saw she was raising her hand. So just before you make your comment, I want to hear from her first.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dirk. Well, I think we're looking at an issue, very realistically speaking, about local constraints, but having a global mindset. Because at the end of the day, we're sitting in an environment and in a country that has this capability. So, yes, it's still developing, and globally, it's still developing as well. I mean, we're moving out of an era of a governmental, really close military type of defense utilization of space, and into a commercial arena, as well as, if we're going to speak about governmental perspective, which is really important, that Dan has mentioned, from SANS's perspective around civil use, whether it's disaster risk management, whether it's around policy making. But this is a continuum. So the challenge that I do find, though, is when we're having this discussion in African environments, is that we speak a lot about the limitations rather than the opportunities. So I'm going to give you a real world example from a commercial perspective right now. What we're developing in terms of the FleetStar constellation is to look at how do we build sustainability around building a large-scale satellite constellation. I see that there was a conversation, there was a question in the chat asking about how how our market in Africa is actually a market for consumers rather than a market for exporters. And the fact of the matter is that as more applications develop, as we move more and deeper into commercial applications for space, this brings us to far larger opportunities. So with FleetSAR, we're saying we're developing a space program. The space program needs to develop 12 satellites with a lifespan of 7 years. The program is looked as to have a lifespan of around 20 years. That is first phase, 12 satellites. Second phase, we're looking at 40 satellites. This being developed in South Africa, facilities being developed in South Africa, human capacity development being brought in South Africa, coming from the African continent, wanting to service the African countries and African needs. South Africa is spending, and I hope I'm able to share these details, in excess of 1.5 billion rand on external service providers to provide synthetic aperture radar data, as well as optical data, high resolution data, whether it's from 10 meters all the way down to 0.5 centimeters, the most expensive being 0.25 centimeters, analyzed by AI. But listen, if we keep within our borders and have restrictive thinking, and I'm going to really push on that. It is hard right now, but globally, this industry is growing and it fully has the capacity for there to be space for new developments as well as expansion. So we're being brave enough. We aren't saying it isn't hard, but we're being brave enough. We're saying we're African, we're coming into this market, and we aim to conquer it with our own space infrastructure, whatever that means geopolitically and whatever that means locally, fully inclusive in government, in our country, and proudly South African. Thank you.
Yes, I have to. Yeah, I have to say thank you, Tanwani. I enjoyed the passion at the end. It's something that also resonates with me. Uh, 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 I see. So, Carla, I know you still had a point, and I really don't want to stop this discussion. Just for the benefit of the members in the audience, I'm just quickly scanning through, and it seems like most of the one or two questions that are somewhat related to this discussion have been answered. Carla, I think you should finish your point, and then we call it an end to this discussion. Then we might take one or two questions very briefly, and then we're going to finish off with our closing remarks. Thank you.
Okay, so first, I just wanted to say I agree with Leandi. I mean, the space industry is small. I say this with humility, but to make a point, I think there's very few people in the space industry who don't know me. I've been in it 20 years, but I've never worked in the space industry. I've been trying to work in the space industry for 20 years. I still don't have a place, so I had to start my own space mission. So it is small, but what I think's being missed here is a whole market of digital entrepreneurship. If we did have infrastructure, and the points made by Tangwani were very pertinent, I think, space projects like constellations seem very expensive, but when you compare those to what we spend on disaster mitigation and what we spend on buying in data, etc., those could cover the costs of constellations. But I think our space industry, if we could get to a point where we can make data available and maybe drive digital entrepreneurship, because then anyone with a computer who has access to data can develop an application. And that is fast turnaround, it's fast revenue driven generating. And so I think a real focus should be digital entrepreneurship in the space sector. I think that's something that could really bring a big impact to a lot of people on the ground, as Dan was saying their challenge is. So I just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you.
Dirk,
I think yes, Dan.
just to say that, I mean, we are not advocating for many companies to exist. What we are saying is space by its nature can inspire young people to look beyond their personal circumstances and see themselves living outside of those restricting circumstances, informal settlements, rural environment with limited infrastructure, digital infrastructure for that matter as well, right? So space is fantastic as a stimulant for dreaming and dreaming big, beyond the solar system, beyond the Milky Way galaxy, dreaming big. So not everybody has to have a business in space, but people can use products, services, innovations from the space value chain to better inform their, construction businesses, agriculture, whatever their persuasion is. Elon Musk didn't start with a space business. He came in. Jeff Bezos didn't start a space business. He came in. He was already a successful entrepreneur elsewhere, identified a gap, and came in. So not everybody has to be a Sunspace or any of the companies that are associated with space business, upstream, midstream, or downstream. But entrepreneurship is necessary for all. Everybody must entertain that idea. Otherwise, a job is never going to satisfy one from an improvement of quality of life. That is the essence. Not everybody must have a space company.
Yeah, I agree. I agree and I disagree. I think not that it's my point, not that it's my role to give my opinion, but there's been an interesting discussion happening in the comments to those that are not reading, um, where we talk about space and space adjacent companies, and I think this is a case where of the language that we are speaking in this panel discussion might be different, where we uh, the difference between the satellite specific industry and the larger space industry, um, shouldn't necessarily be lumped together as the same market, the same potential. That being said, I think currently as South Africa is being, and as mentioned in the comments, currently when we talk about um, exporting hardware to other countries and we talk about this private sector in South Africa, we talk about satellite hardware. However, Dan, as you mentioned, and I'm sure it's going to be a lot more relevant in the next decade, maybe 2 decades, is suddenly we're going to see a lot more sectors that are not satellite based, but still operating in space when you're talking about mining and manufacturing and all of those things. Um, and all of these space adjacent adjacent to satellite technologies is a near limitless opportunity for entrepreneurs in South Africa in the coming years. Now, Nelly has been messaging me on the side saying we need to wrap it up. I I am quite
Sure.
comfortable leaving this conversation here. Yes,
Dirk,
Ronnie,
if I could,
you
and
may.
this really is a nod, I believe, to where we are as an industry in terms of our development and where we're going as a spacefaring nation. I really do like the fact that you have brought up around the broad nature of space. So having exposure to space resources, having exposure to the various verticals, whether we're talking about space transportation systems. I know you mentioned that South Africa has a fantastic geographical position in terms of orbital positioning for space launch services. In terms of the various consulting, space law, policy making, manufacturing. There's a huge one that's happening right now with data centers, for example, that will be built in space simply because, from an environmental cooling perspective, the space environment is quite cool and we wouldn't need to use more water and environmental sustainability. What I would have loved is for us to expand on the possibilities that are available once again, and I'm really going to make this a challenge to a lot of people in terms of how we think about speaking about space in the African context. Space is a global matter. It is about humanity. And yes, we do speak about the socioeconomic aspects. We do speak about the economic benefits that are derived from countries being spacefaring countries and investing very heavily in science and technology. My dream is to see an Africa that sits and has and is part of and is participating in the advanced discussions about space technology. Because once we have those discussions, that's where we can start solving our societal challenges. If we're able to grow food in space and grow food on Mars, there's no reason why we should be having challenges with food security. If we're able to do 3D printing and build human settlements in lunar environments using lunar regolith as well as Martian regolith, then we shouldn't be having issues about developing our own infrastructure where people live on planet Earth. And this applies across the board. I really want to see the type of conversation start being had and supported where we're saying you're young, come in come into space science, come into space technology, come into STEM, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we're building the groundwork that's necessary for the next generation to be an interplanetary spacefaring generation for the whole of humanity. Thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'm going to immediately hand over to Nelly so that she can make her final points. But I think Nelly, you can definitely hear from the panelists that they're keen on having some more discussions. So
Yeah,
I think
that's
it's a good
yeah,
opportunity for you to have some more Space Hub sessions.
yeah.
Maybe so reinvite this exact panel
But
group.
absolutely, thank you. Honestly, this
But
has been a
yeah,
very
over to you.
interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Dick. I think before I conclude, I was wondering if any of the panelists have like parting words or final words they might want to leave with the audience, something that you probably haven't mentioned that you say you think that yeah, I have to get this out just to make a clear point. So we could have maybe 5 more minutes for that, and then I'll round off with just one or two.
I jump in, Nelly. I jump in.
Yeah, so yeah, 1 minute each for
One
the
minute each.
parting
Okay,
words. Yes.
great, great.
This is where
One minute.
the TikTok format comes in, eh? 30
Yeah,
seconds.
TikTok attention span presentation.
Look, we live on the most youthful continent on earth. We have a window that is open. This window won't stay open forever. And we are endowed with young people. What we need to do is to focus. I'll quote Chinese philosopher and close with a futurist. If your vision is for a year, plant rice. If your vision is for 10 years, plant trees. If your vision is for 100 years, educate children. That is Confucius, the Chinese philosopher. But here is a futurist, Alvin Toffler. The illiterate of the 21st century are not going to be those who cannot read and write, but they're going to be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So We have learned to churn children out of academic institutions, and those with factories love to put them on assembly lines. But these are individuals who need to be independent and free. And so we need to change the way we have been doing things if we want to harvest the African youth demographic dividend way before Agenda 2063, the year 2063. Thank you for the opportunity, Nelly.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan. It's so great to have you join us today. Thank you. And I'll just go to Carla. Maybe I'll do it that way. And then, yeah.
Well, I won't start another debate, so I'll just speak to my presentation. I agree that the youth is our future. And so for me, I mean, working on Africa to Moon is a drive to inspire the youth to know that where they are is not where they have to stay and they can dream big. I think hope is very important for people's futures. And if we work together, we can get there. And so we also want to show that collaboration is key to our future. So I would make those my parting comments.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carla. That was beautiful. And Lee?
Hi, so I feel like I was the negative Nancy in the conversation. So maybe just to have my parting words be, I think the success of CubeSpace and a lot of the other industry partners in South Africa is proof that that Africa has what it takes to not just make it in the space industry, but to be world class and to be really leaders in our field. And so I really want this to be a positive thing where we see both the opportunities that is space, which is endless, and then just also that we feel as Africans that we can, that there is a real belief as Africans that we have the capability to do it, because I think there are these examples and proof is in the pudding that we can do it, but I think sometimes still there's a lack of belief in ourselves and in our countrymen and on our own capabilities. So I suppose that's my parting comments is that I really hope that through partnership and collaboration, we can show the world of what Africa is capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee. I don't think you were the negative Nancy. I think sometimes some things are the elephant in the room, and sometimes it's possible to ignore them. So just bringing up some of those issues that are contestations is good as well, so we can talk about them, learn, and find a way to solve them. So thank you for all your contributions. I can see Alana, so I'll go with Alana and then Tagwane. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nelly. Yeah, I agree with the panel, and I just want to say thanks. And I think my parting comment is I'm very excited to see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years in South Africa and Africa. Particularly with, Sansa's coming on board with lots of grant programs, the Cape Constellation's now up and running. And I think James has big plans for not only Western Cape and Gauteng, but also the non-dominant provinces as well in South Africa. So let's see where that goes across Africa and the world. And I think there's now more than ever a lot of opportunities that we can all, get our hands on. So yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alana. And yes, go ahead.
Right, largest space company, space transportation company in the world, run by Elon Musk, South African. The second space tourist in the world and first commercial African astronaut in space, Mark Shuttleworth, South African. The first mission on the far side of the moon, launching radio astronomy on the far side of the moon, Miss Carla Mitchell Nee Sharp, Africa to Moon, South African. Okay, the first gentleman to ever fly past the command line in terms of a private astronaut was educated at Wits University, Mike Melis with Spaceship One, the precursor to Virgin Galactic, South African, all right? The Square Kilometer Array, the largest telescope in the world, looking at what's happening in the middle of the universe, South African. I don't think that this is a coincidence at all. I say we push agriculture, we push mining, and we push space, because it isn't a coincidence that some of the best achievements that have been done in the world in space are South Africans and by extension, African. Thank you.
I really like the ending. I really like it.
Woohoo! That was
Woohoo!
amazing.
Yeah, that was amazing. I want a passport. That was amazing. Thank-
Celebrity. She is too modest. Do you understand? She is taking Africa to the moon, good
Yeah,
people. Let's keep that energy.
we don't talk about it as we don't talk about it enough. I think we should always talk about Africa tomorrow.
Watinta wafazi, watinte mbokodo.
Oh. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for your time today. So, just a quick announcement. If you're not following us on social media, I would really appreciate your support so you can keep in touch with us, all our projects. We regularly announce the webinars on the website and on our social media pages. Apart from the webinars, we do other work as well in the space industry. So, we'd really like to see your support for that. Early next month, first week of April, 4th of April, we'll be having our next dialogue, and I'm closely working with the Ethiopian Space Science Society to have our next dialogue. So we'll be focusing on Ethiopia. So hopefully we'll have you all join the call as well if you have the time. So just before we finally all go, happy to call for a group photograph if you all don't mind. Everybody in the audience, thank you for staying so far. We had a consistent audience. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, so feel free to put on your camera and join us for a picture. Kenny, Timothy, Victor. Okay, let me just see who is on the call. Okay. Hi, A-Team. Good to have you, A-Team. Oh, hi, Max. Good to see you again. It's really good to always see, people that are joining our calls often. Feels like, a very wonderful community. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to take the picture now. Just give me a second. Opening the right. Okay. I'm wondering. I'm trying to make it the whole, not just the view I can see, but the view for everybody. I think somewhere in the settings. Okay, if any other person is taking a picture, you can also send to me later, but I'm taking a couple from my end. So thank you so much for your time, everybody, and have a lovely weekend ahead.